Do you remember anything about your elementary days? What about that first crush you had? I realize that this might not be the case now, but when I was in elementary school, we would pass notes to someone we liked. I remember that first time that I liked a girl. I asked a friend of mine to give her a note, and the note contained this question: "Do you like me? Check yes or no." Well, when I received a response and it was a yes, I was so excited. Our school had a running track where everyone would gather before school and at breaks, and we would walk around the track with friends. I could not wait because I knew I was going to get to walk around that track with my new girlfriend and possibly even get to hold her hand. Wow, what a day. Well, it sounds silly today, but at the time, that was something very special, unless, of course, the person checked no. In 1996, George Strait released a song that describes this kind of schoolyard romance. It's entitled Check Yes or No. Here are the lyrics to the first verse of the song. It started way back in third grade. I used to sit beside Emmylou Hayes, a pink dress, a matching bow, and her ponytail. She kissed me on the school bus, but told me not to tell. Next day, I chased her around the playground, across the monkey bars to the merry-go-round, and Emmylou got caught passing me a note. Before the teacher took it, I read what she wrote. Do you love me? Do you want to be my friend? And if you do, well then don't be afraid to take me by the hand. If you want to, I think this is how love goes. Check yes or no. Well, when we become adults, we realize that relationships are a little more complicated, especially since we live in a culture that doesn't necessarily view relationships in the same way Christians might. This is why the last two sessions of our Living Wisely in a Foolish World study will take us to another Bible book that God led Solomon to write, the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon. Both sessions will focus on building healthy relationships. This is Solomon's love poem, and it tells the story about his romantic relationship with the woman who would become his wife. She's only mentioned once by the title Shulamite, and that's in Song of Songs, chapter 6, verse 13. Now, we don't know much about her, so this could be her actual name, her married name. It is the feminine form of the name Solomon, meaning peaceful one. Or it could be the name of the area where she grew up. But what we do know is that she was Solomon's first and truest love. And this Bible book serves as a poetic chronicle of Solomon's romantic relationship with her. And because healthy relationships matter to the Lord, we must become wise in how we invest in relationships. Our passage today gives us 3 actions for building healthy relationships, especially between a husband and a wife. We're going to be looking at Song of Psalms beginning in chapter 2. And the first action we should take is listed right in that passage of verse 15. So go ahead, grab your Bibles, and let's turn to Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 15. And we're going to look at the very first thing we need to do in order to maintain healthy relationships. And this is the first thing. We should protect our relationships. Listen to what Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 15 says. It says this: "Catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, for our vineyards are in bloom." Because this is a poem, it's a rich blend of literal and figurative language, making the interpretation of this particular passage somewhat challenging. The wisest approach to this passage is to understand that as God's people, we must become wise in protecting our relationships with each other, because predators stand ready to destroy relationships like little foxes that ruin the vineyards when they are in bloom. The setting in this passage takes us to a vineyard, possibly in the springtime at the height of the bloom. Because foxes are so small, they could sneak into the vineyard, chewing up vines and roots before anyone ever noticed, possibly making the vines and the crop unsalvageable. It was imperative that farmers protect their vineyard from these threats. This vineyard, Solomon describes, was not having problems. As a matter of fact, he states in the passage, it was in full bloom and on the brink of a grand harvest. He warns us that this is the time especially to be on guard. We can never lose sight of protecting relationships, especially the marriage relationship. Like little foxes, gnawing away at grapevines, issues, habits, people, difficulties, or choices can sneak into a marriage. Before a couple realizes it, the relationship has been damaged. Honorable things like responsibilities at work, duties at church, relationships with other family members can gnaw away at relationships if a couple doesn't continually strive to protect their marriage. Unhealthy friendships with other couples can compromise a marriage relationship. Foolish couples might allow their time together to be compromised or replaced by other activities. If a couple doesn't spend time with one another, they might look for someone else to fill the void of loneliness, leading to an extramarital affair. Whatever the case, a wise couple will be on guard. They will protect their relationship at all costs. So we should protect our relationships. Second, mutual commitment is needed in order to sustain healthy relationships. Shulamite describes mutual commitment in verses 16 and 17. So let's look at those passages together as well. In verses 16 and 17 it states, "My love is mine, and I am his. He feeds among the lilies. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee, turn around, my love, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the divided mountains." Notice her declaration of commitment in verse 16. Notice she states in this passage, "My love is mine and I am his." This declaration exemplifies the kind of love that God intends for couples to enjoy in a marriage. God created marriage so that a man and a woman might be united as one. We know that goes all the way back to the book of Genesis. Oneness refers to the mental, spiritual, physical, emotional, and relational unity that is reserved for marriage alone. Too often, mutual commitment is missing in a marriage. Husbands and wives live separate lives, with the husband doing this thing and doing his thing, and the wife doing her thing. When there is a higher priority placed on personal interest over mutual commitment, then marriage relationships truly suffer. She also makes a reference in here to feeding among the lilies and another reference to until the day breaks. She indicates with this figurative language the day when he and she would be able to give themselves to each other completely without reservation. The gazelle or young stag portrays the man who's passionate about the intimacy that he anticipates sharing with the woman. In turn, she reflects her desire for intimacy with the man by referring to him as her love. Healthy marriage relationships are only possible when mutual commitment is a priority. It's not a relationship that takes without giving. It's not a half-hearted commitment, nor is it a one-way commitment or a conditional commitment. It is a mutual commitment that desires not only oneness, but also desires the best for the other person in the relationship. Mutual commitment in marriage paints a picture also of how the body of Christ is to be united. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 10 says that we are to be united with the same understanding and the same conviction. In a recent Daily Bread devotion, the city of Texarkana was used to illustrate the importance of mutual commitment. This city is divided by the state line that runs down the center of the main street. Don't know if you know much about Texarkana, but it is a city of 70,000 inhabitants, yet because it's divided by the Texas and Arkansas state line, it has 2 mayors, 2 city councils, 2 police, and 2 fire departments. The high schools are sporting rivals, and there have been disputes even over the shared water system that is governed by 2 different state laws. Yet this city is known for its mutual commitment to one another, even though they are vastly different, even though they are divided by a state line. They are committed to one another. So every year, residents gather annually for a dinner held on State Line Avenue, appropriately named, to share a meal in celebration of their oneness as a community. 1 Corinthians 1:10, in this passage of 1 Corinthians 1:10, Paul calls a divided church to become mutually committed to one another. They had divided allegiances because some like Paul, some Apollos, and some like Cephas or Peter. Paul called them all to be mutually committed to one another because of Christ. Just as Christ himself is not divided, we, as his earthly representation, his body, should be mutually committed to one another. If you're married or soon to be married, what are ways you can express mutual commitment to your spouse? If you are a believer, how can you express mutual commitment to other believers? Well, our third action in order to help maintain relationships is found in chapter 3, verses 1 through 5. And that action is practicing restraint. You see, practicing restraint is vital in keeping a relationship strong. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, describes the woman trying to rest in her bed. Now, Bible scholars can't settle into consistent agreement, but most of them get the impression that she's probably dreaming. As she describes her dream, she helps us understand the importance of practicing restraint. Beginning in verse 1, let's see what she describes to us regarding practicing restraint. In my bed at night, I sought the one I love. I sought him, but did not find him. I will arise now and go about the city, through the streets and the plazas. I will seek the one I love. I sought him, but did not find him. The guards who go about the city found me. I asked them, have you seen the one I love? I had just passed them when I found the one I love. I held on to him and would not let him go until I brought him to my mother's house, to the chamber of the one who conceived me. Young women of Jerusalem, I charge you, by the gazelles and the wild does of the field, do not stir up or awaken love until the appropriate time. The Explore the Bible commentary captures perfectly, I think, the feelings of Shulamite described in this passage. So I'm going to reference that commentary quite often as I try to describe to you what is taking place in Shulamite's dream. In her dream, she's lying on her bed by herself at night. She was restless because she can't find the man whom she refers to as the one in the passage. She's all alone and she misses him terribly. Her loneliness gives way to an eagerness to go out in search of him. She looks for him, but to no avail. No matter how much she searches for him, she simply can't find him. The fact that he's out of her reach creates a growing sense of anxiety with her heart. She wonders if he's ever going to return to her. If he abandons her, she would have to deal with the aching grief of having lost him forever. Well, in the middle of the night, she goes throughout the city searching for him. She makes her way down every street in the hope that she'll find him. Every plaza or square in the city gets her attention too as she searches for him at every turn. Her motivation for taking on such an extensive search over a vast area of the city can be stated in one key word. That word is love. She's passionately in love with him, and her desire for him turns into heartbreaking agony when he's not with her. Her agony seems to be getting worse as she continues looking for him. Her search has led to nothing more than frustration. As we watch her, we can detect the depth of her passion for the man and her anxiety because she can't find him anymore. In her dream, she's confronted by guards. As she continues her search for the man, The guards make their way through the city, patrolling the streets and plazas where she's looking for him. Notice that the guards found her in verse 3. The fact that they found her raises the possibility that she's gotten lost in her search. Perhaps she's not familiar with the city and lost her way, or maybe she's been looking up and down the streets and inspecting the plazas in a frenzy that's caused her to lose her sense of sound judgment. In a way, finding her turns out to be a means of rescuing her from making a foolish decision. She may have been willing to do something that she would regret if they had not found her. The illusion to being protected from doing something foolish, like throwing restraint to the wind, comes into view with the presence of the guards. Eventually, she finds the man for whom she had been searching. Again, she refers to him as the one she loves. She's devoted to him exclusively and is eager to give herself to him. Now, having found him, she had to make an important choice. She doesn't want to be foolish, but she doesn't want to lose him again either. She decides that she would not let him go away from her, but not having him because not having him in her life is not an option. But I want you to pay close attention to the fact that she doesn't take him back to her bedroom. Quite the opposite. She brings him to the room in her mother's house in which she was born. By bringing him there instead of her bedroom, she registers her determination to practice restraint. She's not going to give in to her eagerness to be sexually intimate with him. That kind of intimacy is reserved for marriage. Now in verse 5, she addresses the young women of Jerusalem. She knows the reality and the ease at which one might lose restraint because they are passionately in love with someone. She commands them to be wise and commit themselves to practicing restraint. The reference in this passage actually references gazelles and wild does, and it brings to mind the innate sexual desire that exists in all male and female creatures. Animals don't practice restraint, but God's people have been challenged to live according to His wisdom. That's why she presents a serious warning about stirring or awakening love. She goes on to warn the young women to wait until the appropriate time for sexual intimacy. Restraint must be practiced until the time is right. The only right time is after the wedding. Most people in our culture today will read this and consider her advice ridiculous. Some would say that she was crazy. This was the man of her dreams, so why not go ahead and give herself to him? After all, they were soon to be married. People use every excuse in the world to justify not using sexual restraint. What they miss with all their justifications is the fact that restraint, or practicing restraint, places a higher priority on respecting the person and on honoring God than it does in the fulfillment of sexual desires. This restraint is honored with guiltless, innocent, satisfying sexual relationships after marriage that is never fully available once restraint is ignored. Think about some of the times in your life over this past week, some of the messages that you're hearing. What messages have you heard or observed this week in the media or in other venues that contradicts the message of restraint, especially as it relates to sexual intimacy? And besides sexual intimacy, what are some other areas in which practicing restraint can help you develop healthy relationships with your spouse or with others? Well, finally, the wedding day does arrive for Shulamite and Solomon. Chapters 3, verse 6 through 5, verse 1 describes the royal celebration and their wedding night. After they're married, they spend their night together as husband and wife because they've protected their relationship, because they were mutually committed to one another and practiced restraint. The picture of their wedding night is filled with affirmations of her beauty and his love for her. In turn, she shares her joy over the intimacy that they share together. As we come to a close, I want you to consider these actions. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being little attention and 5 being a lot of attention, evaluate your relationship with your spouse, if you're married, and your relationship with Christ. And I want you to use our 3 actions from today's passage as you evaluate. So, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being little attention and 5 being a lot of attention, how are you at protecting relationships? What about mutual commitment? And what about the area of practicing restraint? Well, based on your evaluation, determine 2 actions you could take to strengthen your marriage relationship and/or your relationship with Christ. Well, at the beginning of this session, I had read a portion of lyrics from George Strait's song entitled Check Yes or No. Here are the lyrics to the final verse of the song. I think you'll find these equally as fun to listen to. Now we're grown up and she's my wife, still like 2 kids with stars in her eyes. Ain't much changed, I still chase Emmy Lou, up and down the hall and around the room too. Last night I took her out in a white limousine. 20 years together, she still gets to me. Can't believe it's been that long ago when we got started with just a little note. Do you love me? Do you want to be my friend? And if you do, well then don't be afraid to take me by the hand. If you want to, I think this is how love goes. Check yes or no. When you protect relationships, are mutually committed to others, and practice restraint, relationships grow stronger and healthier with time. In terms of marriage, it leads to a couple looking back when they grow old together and celebrating the love that is beyond description. Even George Strait's description of a love that has continued to grow can't capture the beauty of a healthy marriage relationship. A wise person will never give up on developing stronger and healthier relationships in their marriage, with others, and with Christ. I pray none of you will ever give up on developing healthy relationships.